Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Kingsmen Sports Podcast, episode number 26 here. And it all started back at the beginning of baseball season, which is a little bit crazy as we segue into our first topic, because now we're in the MLB offseason and we're starting to really see these dominoes fall for these teams that are making some big splashes. A lot of teams are putting a lot of eggs into one basket, hoping they can draw a guy in. And unfortunately, not all of them are getting that guy. So Jacob and I decided to look at the top three, our opinion for the top three biggest moves so far in the MLB offseason. And this looked very different. We were going to record yesterday and things popped up.
Or the day
and
before
man,
that.
This would have looked so different if we would have just done it, 24 or 48 hours ago. So now we are recording this on Thursday. That means like Aaron Judge has signed, Xander Bogaerts has signed. So we're starting to see everything kind of fall into place a little bit. So let's go ahead and start with one that we both have on our top three list. Trey Turner to the Philadelphia Phillies is where we're going to go ahead and start. Turner, 11 years, $300 million. He's 29 years old, which is something to always think about when you see these long-term contracts. But I think he's up there because not only does he make the Phillies so much better, they have that top of the order guy who can get on base for guys like Kyle Schwarber and Bryce Harper, Nick Castellanos, Rhys Hoskins. Those guys have someone to drive in instead of Kyle Schwarber leading off for the Phillies like he did last season. And he's just got elite defense, elite speed, and he also takes a lot away from the Los Angeles Dodgers. Those are big shoes to fill, especially when he took over for Corey Seager. That's going to kind of shift the power, and I think the National League. I'm not so sure that the Dodgers are so much better than everybody else. In fact, I'm not even so sure they're better than everybody else. The Phillies close that gap a lot with Turner.
Yeah, this Phillies team is a team that realized they were a couple pieces away from what they wanted to be and were willing to spend the money to get there. And it's huge. They are getting immediate dividends for a guy who's going to get on base and score runs and add to their win column. You're looking at, wins above replacement, however much stock you put into that stat. Turner gave a lot to the Dodgers these last few years, and you're right, that power shift will be evident when, they already replaced Seager with Turner. Now they're having to look at a second replacement there. It changes a lot in the entire dynamic of the league.
Yeah, the Phillies, they were the representative in the National League in the World Series last season. So they obviously are not that far away from being able to take home
that
title.
Wasn't
Trey Turner
necessarily expected once you were looking
Absolutely
at that playoff bracket. But you add a huge gun like that, and you very well might be.
But that's what I'm saying. That was what I was going to make my point is you look at a team like that can go on those. If they get to the playoffs, they can go on a run. Trey Turner can not only help make that run a lot easier, he can take that run even farther. Again, a guy like Kyle Schwarber leading off, he's not meant to lead off. Kyle Schwarber should be hitting anywhere from 2 to 5 in the batting order. So that right there immediately changes everything. And Turner, he's an elite hitter. So that was a massive move for the Phillies in an absolute loaded NL East. Another NL East move, which was a guy leaving the NL East, is Jacob deGrom, unfortunately signing with the Texas Rangers, a 5-year, $185 million deal. Thank goodness that at least Justin Verlander is gone. He's not on either of our lists, but Jacob deGrom coming to Texas changes things somewhat because of course, he's the best pitcher in baseball. If he's healthy, he is the best pitcher, and I don't think anyone's really going to debate it too much. He can go out there and he can just eat guys alive. He's a guy you go out there and you look and say, okay, he's going to give up 0-1, maybe 2 runs every single time out. It also helps the Rangers get that front end start. That was the issue with Texas last season. Everyone knew it. They brought in Corey Seager and Marcus Semien, and the question was, okay, but that rotation is still very weak. Martin Perez had a pretty solid season. We'll see if he can continue that or if it was just a flash in the pan. DeGrom, though, got to stay healthy. That's a big concern. I think that it makes the Rangers into wild card contenders. I'm not so sure that they're AL West contenders necessarily, but it's still a massive, massive move, especially for the Mets losing a guy like that. But yeah, they did replace him with Verlander, but Verlander isn't quite Jacob deGrom.
Yeah, this is taken into account both the weight that deGrom adds joining Texas, but also what his departure takes away from the Mets. And you're right, Verlander kind of replacing that helps a little bit, but Verlander's getting up there in age. You're wondering how long it is until Father Time finally takes hold. But deGrom to the Rangers is a huge game changer, and one that I was not happy to see in my ticker show up. Um, the Rangers have kind of been stepped on for quite some time in the AL West, ever since, early 2000s, when they had just that insane powerful lineup. Ever since then, they've just been real quiet, and they've at best been decent. And it seemed like they were always missing multiple pieces. And last year, again, that was the pitching 100%. They scored a decent amount of runs last year. They have the lineup that it takes to be a good team. And adding the best pitcher in baseball to lead your rotation, they're going to get so many more wins than they did last year just on this signing alone. Again, if deGrom stays healthy. And that has been an issue multiple years in the past. And so we'll see what comes of it. As a Mariner fan, I'm almost hoping he stays on the IR for most of the season. But for the game of baseball, you want to see him go out there and play the game, and I'm not looking forward to it.
Yeah, when you think about those Rangers teams in the 2010s when they made that World Series run, just fell short against St. Louis. They had some pretty good starting pitchers at the front of that rotation with that power in the lineup. They have, like you mentioned, they have some sneaky good players. Of course, Corey Seager and Marcus Semien get a lot of the attention, but Nathaniel Lowe had a very, very good season. Adolis Garcia is just as powerful as anyone else and one of the best arms in the outfield. They've got some sneaky good players. So that team is going to be one that you don't necessarily want to overlook here headed into the 2023 season. Now we get to our final moves where Jacob and I went different a little bit. I personally went with a move that was made late last night, and that was Xander Bogaerts signing with the San Diego Padres for 11 years and $280 million. Now, this fascinates me for so many reasons. First of all, he's 30 years old. This contract's going to run until he's 41. It also comes with a no trade clause, so he's probably going to be a Padre for the rest of his career. The other interesting thing about it is you have two shortstops on the San Diego Padres that are very good players. Fernando Tatis Jr. We all know about him, all know about that suspension, won't be able to play until May. Ha-Sung Kim also showed what he's capable of last season. He is very, very talented at shortstop, not quite as good of a hitter as the other two, but it just makes you raise your eyebrows a little bit and say, now what's going to happen with these other two guys? You and I texted about it last night. Probably going to see Tatis play outfield or DH a lot from now on. Defense has never really been necessarily his strength after that Gold Glove year. Things kind of fell apart around him. Also, it adds to that NL West, that battle between the Padres and Dodgers, where it always seems like, okay, they make one move, we have to counter with this move. Dodgers really haven't made a move this offseason. They brought back Clayton Kershaw. Xander Bogaerts, I'm not saying that he's going to be the needle mover that all of a sudden makes the Padres the team to beat, but it's going to be very interesting. I don't think it's going to be little brother anymore, especially after the Padres knocked the Dodgers out of the playoffs. I think the gap has closed significantly. And the last thing that makes this move so interesting is it kind of shines a light on the failures of the Boston Red Sox in that front office. They are letting so many incredible players just walk out the door. We saw it with Mookie Betts. Now we're seeing it with Xander Bogaerts. Rafael Devers, he's going to be a free agent after next season. Is he going to be next? The Red Sox are this big, big market team that can just have that, that aura where you're like, okay, being a Boston Red Sox, that would be pretty dang cool. For some reason, that's not enough right now, which means the front office is doing something wrong. You got to start locking up your young talent. Otherwise, they're going to be more than happy to go play elsewhere for a lot more money than you're offering them. So I think the ramifications of Bogaerts just goes across the entire MLB for that late night move.
And I did find it interesting. It definitely affects so many teams because those middle infielders, those giant shortstops on the market were what most teams were pining for. It's what they were needing. Didn't really see the Padres filling that need, but the Padres knew they made moves last year where they thought they were going to be in position to just dominate, which is saying a lot in that division, and they fell short. And I feel like they're really distancing themselves from the reasons that they felt short. One of those being Tatis. I I know they're on the hook for a lot of money. I don't know if they might be making some moves here soon to really seriously distance themselves there. Or like you said, might just move them around in the lineup and play them at different positions. But I feel like him being that hometown favorite, it's that love is just gone with that team. But no, I went with a move that everyone knew from early last year would be the biggest move the entire offseason, and that's Aaron Judge and where he was going to end up. He ended up staying in the Bronx, which is a little anticlimactic, I suppose, with all of the drama. San Francisco Giants, they lock him up. It might not be Padres or the Dodgers who are the powerhouses in that division. It very well might be the Bay. And there were other teams that were just so close. Padres were one of them. Said they outbid the Yankees quite a bit. And nope, Aaron Judge decided to stay home in the Bronx, and that changed everything for this offseason. Teams are having to move on from the fact that they're not getting the best player in baseball right now. They have to figure out what they're going to do for the rest of the offseason as they start preparing for spring training. I mean, that was the it factor for the last 12 months.
Yeah, and the reason I didn't put Aaron Judge on the list, and I've been on record saying this on the podcast before, is when a guy like that ends up back in the same spot that he was in the year previous. I don't see it being a monumental change. I 100% agree with you that these teams that were going all in for Aaron Judge, that were really hoping that they could draw him in, but a guy like that, you can't, as a front office, really say, okay, we're going to get this guy and he's going to be what solves all our problems. You got to start going plan B, plan C. The Giants kind of already did that by throwing a lot of money at Mitch Haniger as well. Right. I'm not saying Haniger and Judge are the same players.
I think that was supplemental to Judge, not, hey, if we can't get Judge, we'll take this.
But you can't tell me that the Giants were saying, we're getting Judge, 100% confidence. No team goes into any player right. thinking that. And with Judge coming back to the Yankees, things kind of look pretty similar. The Yankees did lose or are going to lose a couple of pieces, which are going to make things interesting. We're also going to see, can Aaron Judge stay healthy? That's been something that has lingered with him, is these injuries. He finally got a full season and he seemed to just put it all together. Is that going to be consistently what we see from Aaron Judge over the next decade? Or is that going to be like, hey, that was Aaron Judge's best season without question? It's going to be hard to beat that. But is that going to be more of a median, or is everything else going to is that going to be kind of the outlier when you look at the career of Aaron Judge when all is said and done? There's been a ton of big moves though, and that one definitely
a huge off season.
It's been a wild week. Every time I think something's settling down, all of a sudden there's a big moves.
A lot of big moves that obviously wouldn't crack the top 3 list, but I mean, there were just so many moves that in other years it would be a huge game changer. I mean, there were some names we both left off this list that in other years they would have been number 1, number 2. So it's been crazy.
Yeah. I mean, we didn't talk about Justin Verlander. That is massive. Right. Carlos Correa still hasn't signed, so obviously we didn't talk about him. Teoscar Hernandez to Seattle is a big trade that you can't overlook. That's a 30 home run guy, an all-star every single year. So things are very interesting, and there's still some pieces out there. You and I kind of talked about JD Martinez off air. Also, we just mentioned Carlos Correa still floating about out there. And then there's some trade pieces as well. Sean Murphy, going to be a guy to look out for from Oakland getting traded. So a lot of interesting moves still to come. One of them that already happened was the Chicago White Sox losing Jose Abreu to the Houston Astros. That kind of segue. I don't like that at all. But that is going to segue into our next segment, which will come up after this commercial break. It's the Chicago White Sox Mount Rushmore, the top 4 White Sox of all time. This was a tough one. We'll talk about it next year on the Kingsmen Sports Podcast.
Alderson's Awards West Printwares is your one stop to tell the world about your school, club, or business. Spread the word on jackets, shirts, hats, and more from Awards West Printwares in Centralia. Awards West Printwares offers fast service of quality products including screen printing and embroidery done on site. They offer a wide variety of advertising specialties at great prices and delivered right to your door. For a full catalog, go online to aldersons.net. For maximum impact, Aldersons Awards West Printwares is ready to serve you today.
Good Health Nutrition Center in Centralia is your home base for nutrition. When you visit Good Health Nutrition Center, you'll find the largest selection of vitamins, supplements, and natural remedies. You may be surprised to also find a huge selection of healthy groceries such as gluten-free products, environmentally friendly products, organic fruits and vegetables, and items for specific diets like the diabetic diet. Good Health Nutrition Center, powering students and athletes from the inside out. Good Health Nutrition Center on Harrison in Centralia.
Welcome back here to the Kingsmen Sports Podcast. It is time for Jacob and I to talk about the Chicago White Sox Mount Rushmore. This one, not necessarily easy. The White Sox have a lot of historical success on their side. A lot of players who kind of stood out among some pretty bad teams, honestly, teams that weren't going to go out and win a World Series. But we had to narrow it down to 4, so let's go ahead and dig right into it with the no-brainer, the first guy I thought of when I saw that we were doing the White Sox Mount Rushmore.
Everyone.
It's the big hurt. It's Frank Thomas. Yeah. This guy was one of the most feared hitters, one of the most intimidating hitters in the history of Major League Baseball. Frank Thomas hit 307, 427, 568. That was a slash line with the White Sox. 448 career home runs in Chi-Town, 1,465 RBIs. He had one more walk than he had RBIs, 1,466, 2,136 hits, a 995 OPS, and he's the franchise leader in home runs, RBIs, runs, doubles, slugging, you name it. He's probably going to hold the franchise record in it. A World Series champion in 2005. And when I look at Frank Thomas, I kind of look at him as he's the guy that you made him create a player on the video games. Just this massive, massive home run hitter, just going to mash everything. This guy was awesome. And I love watching him as an analyst. I know we don't put anything into that, but man, he knows the game of baseball pretty well. It's terrifying. I would never want to see him walk into a batter's box when I'm on the mound.
No, especially with the 3-foot piece of rebar he has in his hands as he walks into the on-deck circle.
Toothpick.
Yeah. No, Big Hurt was as dominant of a player as you could ask for in the 90s. His stats, you mentioned them, just phenomenal. 16 years with the Sox, won back-to-back MVPs. One of them was unanimous. Made it to 5 All-Star games, snagged a home run derby championship, 4 Silver Sluggers, and won the batting title in 97. As I was mentioning, the guy's warm-up routine on the on-deck circle was accompanied by a 3-foot hunk of bridge rebar, easily 3+ times the weight of a baseball bat. He leads the club in almost every offensive stat you can think of for a power hitter, was a no-doubt Hall of Famer. And during his entire career, he was an active fighter for the integrity of the game. He voluntarily was interviewed by the Mitchell Report. He championed for regularly drug testing players. He said that, especially during the 90s, elite players who did it the right way suffered greatly from the heavy steroid use of the era. And he said he was probably hurt the most out of anyone because of how amazing of a career he was having. I mean, he's still tied for 20th on the all-time home run list. he's actually tied with Ted Williams, who, when he was first coming up, people were comparing him to. I mean, we were talking about Ted Williams, what was it, last week before? Just last week,
last
right?
week.
And just how insane of a hitter he was for the power that he had. Frank Thomas was right there being compared with him. So even with significant gaps of playtime because of injury, he was just a monster of a player.
Yeah, and he was fantastic in that movie, Mr. Baseball. I don't know if you ever seen it. It's a pretty good one.
Oh,
I was hoping so, but man, that movie doesn't get made if it's not for Frank Thomas coming up. So
Right.
no, he's just a scary, scary player. But man, you mentioned it, the integrity of that guy, how he wanted baseball to be viewed so cleanly is really, really admiring. And White Sox fans absolutely adore him for it. A special, special player there. Number 2, we are going to go way back, way back. We're going to go to Luke Appling, who most of you probably have never heard of. He's a pretty good baseball player, though, an incredible hitter. He's an absolute hit machine. Hit 310 in his career with the White Sox, 399, 398 slash line, 45 home runs, not a lot of home runs in his career, 1,116 RBIs, though 1,302 walks, 2,749 hits. That's where he made his living, a 798 OPS. Franchise leader in games played and hits. Just an on-base machine. Played into his 40s and really never slowed down too much. Only had 4 seasons where he hit below 300, and one of them he was 43 years old for, and he did not miss it by much. Just absolutely ahead of his time. If he was playing in today's game, he's the guy you want at the top of your order, no matter what team you are. You want him leading off, getting on base, and guys are going to drive him in. He would have been just all over the base pass. I mean, you think about the best leadoff hitters today, all of them have power. This is the guy you want leading off for those guys to drop down to hit number 2 and hit 2-run homers instead of solo shots. Luke Appling, he was coming up. You pretty much knew he was going to be on base.
Yeah, he clear Hall of Famer, went to 7 All-Star games, won 2 separate batting titles, and he missed nearly 2 full years of his prime due to World War II as well. He would have a lot more awards if awards were around at the time of his playing. He was an absolute hitting machine, and he drew walks like no one else. He helped a very struggling team most of his long career. He had terrible defense. He has, out of Hall of Famers, some of the worst defensive stats in the game, but his hitting and his speed made him indispensable. You kind of think, what is the opposite of the Mendoza line, where they're hitting, their poor hitting doesn't make their good defense acceptable? At what point does their poor defense make their fantastic hitting unacceptable? Well, his hitting was well above any kind of measurable line.
Just call it the Appling line.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
Is.
Yeah, he was an absolute fan favorite too. One of the favorite stories I found when I was looking this guy up was he asked ownership for balls to hand out to fans, because what kind of kid doesn't want a baseball when they go to the ballpark, right? And at the time, I don't know, maybe they used real horsehide or something. The balls must have been expensive because the White Sox told him no, that was a waste of money. And so what does he do? He fouls off every single pitch in BP before the game. I mean, countless balls go into the stands just to show the ownership, no, these fans are getting baseballs. And they didn't tell him no anymore after he did that a few times. So he really enjoyed giving the people what they wanted.
A great character. And yeah, a guy who kind of gets lost in Chicago lore because, I mean, they're sharing that city with multiple different teams. Not only is the Cubs there, but the Bulls, so much history. And then the Bears are also there and had some pretty good teams, despite the fact, modern era not so good for him. But a guy who kind of gets lost in the shuffle, but man, he shouldn't. He was awesome. Another guy who got kind of lost in the shuffle is one that we both had on our list, Big Ed Walsh. Yeah, that's right. If you have the nickname Big, you are a special player, a player that probably every fan loved. Walsh was just that guy. 195 career wins with the White Sox, a 1.81 career ERA, a 0.995 whip, 1,732 strikeouts, 249 career complete games. Not only is he the franchise leader in ERA, he is the all-time MLB leader in ERA with that 1.81 ERA. No pitcher has had a lower career ERA than Big Ed Walsh. Just out there, he was going to do his thing. He was a workhorse, the stereotypical workhorse, where you knew he was going to go out there and he was going to throw 9 innings regardless of how many runs he gave up. And most of the time, it wasn't many. And one of the most fascinating things was in 1908, Ed Walsh had 40 wins in that season, the second most since the year 1900. So Ed Walsh, yeah, he was Nolan Ryan before Nolan Ryan, just out there doing his thing. Awesome guy, awesome player that I wish we could have seen in today's game, although I don't know how well he necessarily would have gotten along with the media.
Yeah, another example of if only awards existed back then, he would have an entire closet full. Something you didn't point out, I know you alluded to it, but just the stats, 2,946 and a third innings pitched. Continuously led the league in that department. He often, not once or twice, often was approaching or surpassing 400 innings a season. That is ridiculous. That they won't let you do that anymore.
No.
He's
Your arm will fall off.
Yeah, 100%. You'll get arm cancer. It's not good.
Yeah.
Like you said, all-time leader for the entire MLB in ERA and FIP. Won the ERA title twice, his lowest being 1.27. 1.27 over an entire season where he pitched 369 plus innings. That is unfathomable.
Stupid. It's stupid.
Yes, it is stupid. And he didn't surrender many home runs or walks either. Usually, you have all of those strikeouts, you have those low scoring games, you have some kind of chink in the armor where if a team connects, they can at least get something on the board. Only 23 long balls over 13 years in Chicago. Only 608 walks too, which I know I just said 23. That sounds like a really small number, and 608 sounds a lot bigger than that. Until you factor out, it gives him a 2.81 strikeout to walk ratio. Just insane. I know the awards didn't exist back then. He'll just have to settle for world record holder and world champion as his only accolades, because he did bring a World Series to Chicago. They don't have too many of those, so
that's a bummer that he's gonna have to be remembered as just that. Poor guy.
I know.
No, yeah. he was an absolute monster. Our last spot, we went different on our fourth spot, but I'm actually glad this last week things got a little bit heated. This week I'm glad that things worked out the way they did, because I think both guys that we picked deserved it. There's just only one spot. I went more modern. I went with Paul Konerko. Paul Konerko was just, he was Chicago for so many years. He kind of took the torch from Frank Thomas and ran with it. Hit 281, 356, 491 in his career with the White Sox. 432 career home runs with Chicago, 1,383 RBIs, 2,292 hits, and 847 OPS. Is the franchise leader in total bases and games played. Then he's second, third, and fourth in pretty much everything else. Second in home runs and RBIs behind just Frank Thomas. He is also third in hits and doubles, fourth in runs, had 30-plus home runs in 7 seasons with the White Sox, was the ALCS MVP in 2005, and of course they went on to win that World Series over Houston that year, making him a World Series champion. 6-time All-Star in his career as well at first base. Just an absolute workhorse. He's going to put on his helmet, go to work, and take care of business. Was all business, though. Team captain from 2006 to 2014 as well. You don't see a lot of baseball teams give out that title of captain very often. Paul Konerko earned that title with the Southsiders, had his number 14 retired. His walk-up song was Harvester of Sorrow by Metallica. And anyone who watched him play said he embodies that song. His teammates all agree that's his song because he was all business once he got to the baseball field. He's praised by his former teammates for his leadership and just everything he did to help them in their careers as well as help the city. And a fun fact to relate him kind of to us Pacific Northwest fans. Yeah, he was an absolute Mariner killer in his career, but he was traded from the Cincinnati Reds to the Chicago White Sox for Mike Cameron, who ended up getting flipped to the Mariners. So if it wasn't for Paul Konerko going to the White Sox, Mike Cameron maybe never even is a Mariner. Interesting little note there, but Paul Konerko, he is absolutely adored in Chicago. He's up there with all these guys and how much the fans just loved him and how much he meant to the city.
Yeah, definitely one of my honorable mentions for sure. I had to give it to Ted Lyons. Just when you talk about fan favorites, I know we're going back in time a little bit, might not be as connected to modern fans, but during his era, there was no one more beloved. Went 260 to 230 in his win-loss over his career, with a 3.67 ERA, a 1.348 WHIP, 1,073 strikeouts, 356 complete games, and had 70.5 wins above replacement. I know a lot of those stats, you're thinking of, best pitchers on the team. A 3.67 ERA probably isn't going to do it too often. A 1.348 WHIP probably isn't going to do it too often. The strikeouts, the complete games, that's great. 70 wins above replacement's pretty solid for any player over a tenure with a team. You take that into consideration. He also had a 2.33 batting average, which is pretty darn good for a pitcher, especially when you give him over 1,700 plate appearances. So that wasn't a small sample size by any means. But where he really, really shines on this list is his connection to the fans and to that city. He skipped the minor leagues entirely, going straight from college ball to the bigs. He no-hit the Red Sox in his third year, really solidifying himself as a champion for that city. In fact, as he started aging, they really couldn't pitch him as much as a typical pitcher. So they just, as an organization, just said, you know what? Sundays are Ted Lyon days. Teddy Sunday is going to come out and pitch. I mean, you think about King's Court. This was the original player gimmick for, early 1900s. And the fans loved it. The Sunday games, Sunday afternoon games, which are usually a pretty big dip in attendance, were the biggest that team had. And he won a lot of them too, even up when he was getting up in age pretty heavily. And that's despite having a pretty crappy team surrounding him. In fact, the Yankees manager at the time said that if he were a Yankee, he would have won over 400 games easily in his career. He has to settle for 260 because he stayed with the White Sox. Even though he was well into his 40s and not required to serve, he still enlisted as a Marine for World War II and fought in the Pacific. So I know all of these young cats, some of them got drafted, some of them, went in voluntarily and kind of just played baseball for the Army. This guy had zero obligation to go in, 40-year-old, and still served his patriotic duty. Came back for one more year, didn't last too long. He was done. But just as solid of a player as you can ask for, really connecting with your fan base.
Yeah, and that was so cool. The Sunday Teddy. That's just the best. It's incredible. I love those gimmicks. I'm a big gimmick guy. And of course, you mentioned the King's Court fans. Of course, we would have absolutely Love that. We would have been there so many Sundays throughout the season. He also made my honorable mention. I told you the debate I had between him and Big Ed Walsh just went back and forth. It was one of the hardest decisions I've made in Mount Rushmore. So Ted
You
Lyons,
got to include an MLB leader. You just can't.
I know, and that's what it came down to. So yeah, Ted Lyons was obviously on my honorable mentions. Also on there were Eddie Collins and Shoeless Joe Jackson. Of course, he's more known infamously for the Black Sox scandal, and most of what he did on the field was with Cleveland. So couldn't quite put him on there, even though he's kind of loved, especially from, Field of Dreams, brought a lot of love into Shoeless Joe, but just couldn't quite have him on there. But I did want to give him a special shout out. I think you had a couple similar, but maybe one difference on your honorable mentions.
Yeah, no, a few differences. I did have Shoeless Joe. Again, beloved, probably more legacy from movies than from his actual time playing in Chicago. Paul Konerko obviously had Ozzie Guillen on there. I know, really good player for the White Sox and did bring a championship as a coach. I know we're not taking that into account, but he's still up there on the list. And then Minnie Minoso, one of the first Dominicans to be playing the sport, was kind of a trailblazer and did it very, very well. So
it was a tough little stretch here for the White Sox. I'd put this right up there with the most difficult ones that we've done so far. Next week will be another interesting one. We'll go with the Cleveland Guardians / Indians / Naps, whatever you want to put. We'll see if Shoeless Joe makes that
Fighters,
one. That's going to be
all of them.
Pretty much anything. Cleveland baseball team, everything you can imagine. Cleveland baseball is what we're going to do for our Mount Rushmore next week. Coming up next, we are going to look at every single NFL team. We'll go division by division and talk about whether they know who their quarterback is going to be in the future, if things are a little bit up in the air, or if they are just completely lost. We'll talk about that coming up next year on the Kingsmen Sports Podcast.
This welding program is centered around getting your state structural certifications. They come in, take the welding core classes, get their work done that is pertinent to what they're going to do out into the field. So the industry of welding is booming right now.
There's construction, there's pipe fitting, there's sheet metal, there's opening your own fab shop. Always going to have an opportunity to be a welder. We always need welders.
Welcome back to the Kingsmen Sports Podcast. Let's wrap this up with some NFL talk. We're not really going to dive into what happened last week. It's just would take up too much time to go every single week talking about what happened. So we're going to talk about the future of these teams and, of course, namely their quarterbacks. In fact, that's all we're going to talk about is their quarterbacks. Which teams are going to be in a good spot in the future quarterback-wise that know who their quarterback's going to be? We also have a category where it's a little bit murky, not quite sure they could move on, they could stay, and then teams that are just completely lost. So we're going to go division by division. We're going to start with the AFC East. The Buffalo Bills, no question about it. They know who their quarterback's going to be. We'll make that real quick. Josh Allen, one of the best QBs in the NFL. I'm sure you agree there.
Yeah, this is exactly what they were hoping for when they went and got Josh Allen. He is meeting and exceeding their expectations and really making this team successful for the first time in a while.
Next, the Miami Dolphins. I also think they're in a good spot. This was the year we were supposed to find out about Tua. So far, so good for Miami. He looks like he's got a great relationship with both Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill, and of course, bring in some other guys like Trent Sherfield and, of course, River Craycraft along with them. So I think Tua and the Dolphins are in a pretty good spot.
Yeah, pretty good spot. Not as solid as the Bills, I think, but they definitely know, as long as nothing else changes, he is the quarterback for the foreseeable future in Miami. They are not needing to go out and make changes.
Next up, the New York Jets, who I have in murky waters at best. I think that they are in a spot where they've got both Mike White and Zach Wilson, so they can go with one of those guys that have provided sparks of offense for this team. I don't think they're in that, have no idea what they're doing range, but definitely going to have to make a choice. Do they believe in Zach Wilson, or do they want to turn the keys over to Mike White? It's going to be time for the Jets to make a decision here soon.
See, and I disagree with you. I think they are lost. I don't think they know what they're wanting to do. They could go out and they could draft a quarterback, and it would not surprise me. Seems like they don't know what they're wanting to do week by week, let alone year by year. So I think that Jets are a team that are putting pieces together on the defensive side of the ball, and over the next few years, they're really going to figure out, okay, we need a field commander. What are we going to do here?
Next up, the New England Patriots. I also have them in a murky spot. Mac Jones. We also saw Bailey Zappi. Neither have really taken the reins of that offense. So I think it's going to be a little interesting. I think one of those guys will end up getting that spot, though.
Yeah, I think that they're kind of in a limbo place where that's not the highest piece of the puzzle that they're needing. They're stable, at least at quarterback, and just trying to build a team around them, but it's not solidified by any means.
Let's move to the AFC North. We're going to start with the Baltimore Ravens. It's murky. It's murky because Lamar still isn't signed. Tyler Huntley going to be a free agent as well. It's going to be interesting to see if they franchise tag Lamar. Does he opt to sit out? Do they just let him walk, or do they pay the guy? It's up in the air right now for Baltimore.
Yeah, 100%. Without a renewed contract, you're kind of wondering what you're going to do if they do franchise him, or if they do. I mean, he's looking to get paid, and he deserves to be paid after what he's done with that team. So we'll see how the rest of the season and offseason goes.
Next up, the Cincinnati Bengals. Joe Burrow. I put him right up there with Josh Allen. They know he's their guy. It's the franchise quarterback. He's the face of the team.
Yep, they drafted him to do exactly what he's doing. Took him to a Super Bowl already. They're looking to go back. They're looking to rally around him.
Next up, the Cleveland Browns, who I put them in a murky spot, but they pretty much know who their quarterback's going to be. Deshaun Watson's going to be the quarterback. Jacoby Brissett, I do want to give him a quick shout out because I think he's played himself into a spot where he's going to get an opportunity with another team. But Deshaun's the guy in Cleveland. Whether you think Deshaun's the guy in Cleveland, regardless of all the off the field issues, and there are a lot of them, he is going to be the quarterback as long as the league's going to let him play.
Yeah, they paid him even knowing those issues with a clear goal in mind. He is their quarterback moving forward. I don't even think it's murky. They have made their game plan. Whether it's going to work or not is one thing, but that's the route that they're taking.
And lastly, from the AFC North, the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think they're pretty set. Whether you think Kenny Pickett's the guy, whether he is the guy, he's going to get that opportunity. So I think Kenny Pickett going to be the quarterback for at minimum the next 2 seasons, Pittsburgh.
Yep, 2-3 seasons minimum, I think, is where they'll give Kenny to see kind of how he's sitting and if he is going to be the guy. That's what they drafted him for, hometown kid, that he is their guy, at least for the time being.
Let's move into your division, the AFC South. We'll start with the Tennessee Titans. I think that it's a little murky, but in a good way, because Tannehill, of course, is getting up there in age, but they also brought in Malik Willis, so they have the replacement there. They're not going to be in a desperate, okay, we need to go get a quarterback now. So while it's a little murky on who it's going to be, I think they're in a good spot murky-wise to where, hey, we at least have 2 options available.
I wouldn't even go that far. I think that they are confident in who they have throwing the rock, especially since they don't have as much pressure with King Henry right there. So I think that they are 100% satisfied with who they have under center, and it's going to be Tannehill until he can't do it anymore. I could see him retiring with that team.
Now we have your team, the Indianapolis Colts, and this is the first one I have absolutely in the dark. I don't think they have any clue what they are doing. They're lost. They haven't committed to drafting a guy. They just keep bringing in these old veterans. Matt Ryan, they're paying him more money than he should be making. The Colts are absolutely lost. They're going to desperately need to get a new quarterback this offseason.
Yeah, they're not just lost. They are just completely up a creek and have been since Andrew Luck spontaneously retired. That kind of threw a wrench in their plans. The front office has not rose to the challenge of finding a replacement. I mean, people are calling for heads for anyone who is even moderately involved in the situation. They need to figure something out, and they need to do it quick. And I don't see them doing it this offseason still. I think they're going to hold on to Matt Ryan and see what happens, because that's what they paid him for. But they are lost.
Matty Ice sticking around. Jacksonville, I think that they're solid on who their quarterback's going to be, Trevor Lawrence. I think time's starting to tick a little bit low on Trevor Lawrence. He's going to have to start showing something. I think he did at least take a step forward this season, not a big step, but improvement from last year, which could just be coaching-wise. So Trevor Lawrence, I think, is in a good spot to stay in Jacksonville, will be their starter next year.
Yeah, I mean, especially considering the other rookies that he was alongside with, you draft a kid like that, you're going to give him a decent amount of time to see if he plays out. This isn't, the early 2000s Browns where they're drafting a new quarterback every year or two. And so I think they're going to give him plenty of time. They are content in what he's doing and just going to try to build a team around him. But for at least the next few years, I think they're very solid in what they have.
And lastly, the Houston Texans. I think this team is also lost. I don't think they have any idea what they want to do. Davis Mills seemed like he was going to be the guy. He's kind of fallen off a little bit this season. They haven't really even committed to going out and looking for a new quarterback. I think the Texans are the most lost team when it comes to quarterback in the NFL.
When it comes to quarterback, when it comes to really any other position at all, that is a very lost team. Yeah, I don't see them having a map to a good quarterback.
Let's move to the AFC West, where, let's just skip through. I think all four of these teams are pretty set with who's going to be their starting quarterback next season. Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert, even Derek Carr and Russell Wilson. Well, they're not having great years. They're going to be sticking around. They're not having. Russell Wilson's having an atrocious year, but with the money they paid him, he'll obviously be back. Derek Carr, they're hoping it's just an anomaly. He'll be back stronger. That entire division, I think, is pretty set in stone.
Yeah, for the most part, I agree with you. I think Derek Carr is the one that's closest to the end of that timer ticking. I feel like the patience is starting to wear thin, especially with the other pieces that they've brought in. But especially this offseason, they are not going to go out and spend a lot of money to replace him or draft somebody super early to replace him. They're going to see how it plays out over the next year or two.
Let's hop on over into the NFC. We'll start in the NFC East. The Philadelphia Eagles, they're in a good spot. Of course, there's no questions about Jalen Hurts. Now, he is a guy probably going to win MVP with how things are looking this year. Just everything's working out for Philly.
Not to it? Okay, that's cool.
Last week, you tell me Jalen Hurts is in the front runner after last week.
Yeah, no, for sure. The Eagles, know exactly what they're wanting to do. They will keep playing this kid as long as he's willing to play for them.
Next up, the Dallas Cowboys, I also think are set in stone. They paid Dak a lot of money. They're not just going to cut him loose. Cooper Rush is going to be a free agent. We'll see if he goes anywhere. I was never impressed with Cooper Rush personally. Dak's going to be the quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys for a long time.
Yeah, Cooper Rush did what he needed to do in keeping his team in the game, but he's not quite a starting quarterback yet. And so I feel like the entire quarterback situation there's going to be the same for quite a while.
Next up, the New York Giants and Daniel Jones. This one's interesting. I have this obviously murky. I put Daniel Jones almost in the same category as Derek Carr, where you're still waiting for them to kind of separate themselves. They're not terrible, but they're not taking that big step. That's where I see Daniel Jones and the Giants. They're going to have to make a decision this offseason, regardless of if they're ready to commit to him, ready for him to be their guy for at least another few years, or if it's time to look elsewhere. It's decision time for the Giants.
See, and I almost have Daniel Jones closer to a Trevor Lawrence than I do a Derek Carr, where it's not going quite as well as you were hoping for when you drafted him. Maybe patience is starting to wear thin, but at the same time, you haven't gone out and gotten huge pieces to surround him like the Raiders have. So I feel like that team has bigger needs on their shopping list, and they're going to focus on that and keep Daniel Jones there even a little too long. if I'm just looking at what's transpiring before me. But no, I think that the Giants are pretty solidified, to be honest with you.
Finally, the Washington Commanders, Taylor Heineke and Carson Wentz, of course, I think it's murky at best. I don't think it should be murky. I think they should know, hey, Taylor Heineke deserves to just have our full support behind him, push this guy forward. Of course, there's so much other stuff going on with the Commanders. I'm not even sure football is their top priority right now. It's just an absolute mess, but I'm going to call their quarterback situation murky.
There's just so many elite pieces on that team that you can't squander that talent with a subpar quarterback. I think you said murky at best, and I feel like they're at a position where they need to find an answer and get a good NFL quarterback to be able to get it into Terry's hands, to be able to get that defense off the field enough that they are winning games. Because I know that's one of the strongest divisions in football right now, but 7-5 with a team that really has a lot of talent surrounding a quarterback, that's not good enough.
I guess we just disagree on the talent that Washington Commanders have. Let's move into the NFC North, the Minnesota Vikings and Kirk Cousins. This one's always fascinating. It always feels like the Vikings should move on from Kirk Cousins, and they don't. This year, it feels like, okay, maybe they're starting to figure things out. I think they're pretty set that Kirk Cousins is going to be their quarterback until you see a big dip from him.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see how it goes. He had a very minor contract extension, gets him there until 2024. They might make a change that year. They might just kind of move some pieces around because I don't think that they, are absolutely in love with what they have at quarterback. But at the same time, it's working for them. I don't think that they are feeling the rush to figure something out either.
Next up, the Detroit Lions. This one's an interesting one. Jared Goff still owed a lot of money for Detroit, but I also think it's time to maybe start looking at a replacement, a younger guy, but I don't think it's panic time for Detroit. I think Jared Goff's a capable quarterback. He made it to a Super Bowl. I know that team is absolutely loaded, but he's shown that he's capable of winning some football games in Detroit this season. They could be better, but I think Jared Goff's probably going to be your starting quarterback for Detroit in 2023.
Yeah, Lions are really starting to figure some things out. I think that they are identifying which pieces they really need to improve on. And I think it starts with that defense. I don't think that they're going to worry about quarterbacks until either there's a significant decline or a really good opportunity presents itself.
Next up, my team, the Green Bay Packers. Interesting spot for them. Aaron Rodgers has kind of been all cryptic once again, but I listened to the press conference the other day, and it sounds like they're going to go ahead and pick up the option on Jordan Love regardless of what Aaron Rodgers does. So I think the Packers, they're in a good spot. They know who their quarterback's going to be, whether it's Rodgers, if he doesn't retire, which I don't think Aaron Rodgers is going to, or if it's Jordan Love, if Rodgers does decide to walk away. They know who their quarterback's going to be. It's going to be one of those two guys. I think it ends up being Rodgers, but I think they're in a spot where they feel pretty good about where they're at. They know that they're going to give a shot to one of those guys. They're not going to have to shop elsewhere for a quarterback.
See, you're saying not murky, but everything you're explaining sounds pretty murky to me. I don't know. It seems like there's so much drama every offseason for them that they focus way too much on quarterback. I think that they need to make a decision on, is it Aaron Rodgers? Is it Jordan Love? And move forward with that.
So, but here's my reasoning is Aaron Rodgers, they just gave a contract to, so they know that they want Aaron Rodgers as long as Aaron Rodgers wants to keep playing football. So that's why I think they're sold on both of those guys. It's just, okay.
They don't need to find any new answers, but they don't exactly know what's going on.
Exactly, which is why
I get that.
They've got two answers to one question, which I don't consider as necessarily murky like these other teams that I'm throwing in.
I get it.
The Chicago Bears, I also don't have as murky. I think Justin Fields, what we've seen from him, especially the last few weeks, has earned him another full year minimum to go out and show what he's done. I think Justin Fields is starting to figure things out, and the Bears, I think they've got their quarterback of the future.
Yeah, I'm starting to tiptoe towards the, kind of murky. Chicago changes quarterbacks quite a bit. Even when somebody it looks like they're starting to figure it out. They're not really satisfied. They don't really know which direction they want to go, and they change horses midstream. So we'll see how it goes, but I'm right there with you where it seems to me that Fields is doing what he needs to do for that team at least.
Now let's hop to the NFC South. We're kind of like the AFC West. I'm going to clump them all together because I think on the other end of things, every team in this division is lost at quarterback. I think some teams are a little bit more lost. Tampa Bay, I think, of course, Brady, just the last year of his deal. He's going to be a free agent or he's going to retire. Either way, they're going to need to figure something out. Right. Atlanta, they at least drafted Desmond Ridder. I don't know if that's going to be their long-term answer. I guess they're kind of in a little bit better spot than these other teams in that division, but still a little bit murky to who's actually going to be the guy. Carolina, I think, is absolutely lost. PJ Walker's going to be gone. Sam Darnold's going to be gone. Baker Mayfield's already gone. They are really in a bad spot, one of the worst spots in the NFL. I have them right there with the Colts and Texans, just at a complete loss of what they want to do. In New Orleans, I think they're murky too, completely lost as well. You know, Jameis Winston, when he comes back, is he going to be ready to just kind of take the bull by the horns and be that guy? I'm right there with you. I don't believe in him either. Andy Dalton also hasn't shown that he's capable of winning games, and they don't seem to want to have Taysom Hill be a quarterback. So I think the Saints are a little bit lost as well.
Yeah, I'm right there with you with that whole division. I think that the Falcons have an edge over the other teams just because their current state is slightly better than some of the others, and their future, at least they have a game plan that they're moving forward with. Bucks, you have no idea if their quarterback's going to be available, if he's going to be in the game. If he's not, where are they going to go? They don't really have a backup in place that they've been grooming, at least that we can tell from the outside. And then the Panthers and Saints, they're changing quarterbacks every couple of weeks. You have no idea who can take that team to where this entire division, finally the Bucks are at 500. But other than that, everyone is just scrambling for mediocrity.
Yeah, it's going to be chaos down the stretch. Finally, let's head to the NFC West. The San Francisco 49ers, I also consider a little bit murky. I think that they're going to go with Trey Lance. Jimmy G is going to be a free agent after this year. We'll also see maybe Brock Purdy looks really good and earns an opportunity. Things are a little bit murky right now. A lot of injuries as well for San Francisco. I still think that Trey Lance pick was just chaos. I think Jimmy G should be their guy, but I really don't know what the Niners are thinking.
Yeah. The good thing for the Niners is they have enough talent with the rest of the team that whatever they decide to do with quarterback, whether it's go with one of their own guys, which I honestly don't think they should, or look elsewhere, whether it's the draft, whether it's trading, whether it's free agency, they have options. They have a clear picture of what they're needing to do. And so no matter what they decide, I think that they're going to be able to focus on it properly. But right there with you where currently who's their quarterback, that's kind of up in the air.
Next up, the Seattle Seahawks, who I have murky to a little bit lost. I'm going to keep them firmly in murky. Geno Smith's going to be a free agent after this season. Yeah, he looks really good. Everyone's enjoying it, but it's like, okay, what comes next? Are you going to bring him back? Are you going to look to the draft? Is Drew Lock going to get an opportunity? What's going to go on with Seattle? There's just a lot of question marks around that team and some answers that you're like, okay, I can live with this one, but it's just which answer are they going to go with?
Right. Yeah, right there with you. I feel like solidly standing in the murky field. Are you gonna? I mean, he's been playing well enough that you're gonna have to pay him if you're bringing him back. Are you willing to do that? You were kind of almost committing to a rebuild. Are you going to continue down that line? Are you gonna say no? We're doing pretty darn good. Let's roll with this and see what happens. So, yeah, up in the air quite a bit there.
Next up, the Arizona Cardinals, who I think are pretty solid. They just paid Kyler Murray. He's going to be their guy. Don't need to spend too much time talking about this. Whether you think Kyler Murray is the guy or not, he's going to get a fair shake for the Arizona Cardinals.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt about it. That is their guy. They paid him. He's going to be there for the foreseeable future.
And lastly, the LA Rams, who I also have a little bit murky. I don't know what's going on with Matthew Stafford. I don't know if that elbow's going to ever be back to what it was before. He's also now having some neck issues. I don't know what Stafford's health is going to be like, which is why I think it's murky. He could come back and look like the Matthew Stafford that won a Super Bowl, or he could come back and look like Matthew Stafford that just was on atrocious Detroit Lions teams. It's really up in the air. And of course, the backup spot, Wolford, he might have won a playoff game, but he's not your long-term answer at quarterback.
Yeah, I disagree with you. I think the Rams know exactly what they want to do. I think they're going to play Stafford as long as he's willing to play there and he can be on the field. They just need to focus about giving him some protection so that he doesn't get killed out there. But as long as they are doing that, Stafford is their guy.
So there you go. We went through every single team, gave you all 32 answers to what the quarterback situation could look like for those teams in 2023. That'll do it for this episode of the Kingsmen Sports Podcast. Once again, we thank you guys so much for tuning in with us every single week. Next week's going to be a fun one. We're going to talk about some college football playoff. Tristan's going to hop back on. And of course, we're going to talk about more of these MLB moves if there are any. If not, we'll go a little bit deeper into what happens here this week in week 14 of the NFL season. That's coming up next week on the Kingsmen Sports Podcast.